Excellent. We are go. So, hello. I'm Paul. I'm speaking to you from the south coast of the UK. Welcome to Aim High, the nature first, curiosity powered online school, and welcome to this learning adventure exploring the question: is driving making me sick? Now, we've got a whole series of learning adventures happening this month, including some with Education Scotland, and I definitely recommend going and checking those out on the Aim High website. Okay, just a little disclaimer to begin with, a quick disclaimer. This lesson will explore some scary and shocking information. You might be scared, and it's okay to be anxious. What we're hoping is that, and this is the really important bit, that we turn that anxiety into action, and there will definitely be some good action towards the end. Okay, before we start, I just want to check you can use the chat. So can you write the name of your favourite car just in the chat? Favourite car. Yeah, start your engines. None coming through yet. Let's see. Is anyone? Oh, okay. We've got a Honda. Any other ideas? Is that a Fiat 500? Excellent. We've got a Beetle. Great, great, great. Okay. So, we're going to get going. I'm going to introduce you first of all to this lovely lady. Now, Daisy is your average person, yeah? So this is Daisy, and Daisy, she likes to follow trends. She decided to buy the most popular car in the UK last year. Any ideas what the most popular car in the UK last year was? Any ideas? It was this lovely car. Here it is. It's the maybe the Mini? No, it is the Ford Fiesta. Lovely hatchback here. So Daisy, made a good choice here. She's bought it in silver. I've got a quick question for you again now. How many cars do you think there are registered in the UK? So how many cars in the UK? Cars in the UK. So we know that there are, what is there, about 67 million people in the UK? 67 million people. How many cars? Okay, we've got Henry here has suggested 7. Interesting idea. Surely when you go outside and there are just cars everywhere. Is that not the perception? Okay, we've got a few more guesses. Excellent. 20 million, 25 million, 10 million, 40. Oh, Fatima, excellent there. Yeah, the answer is 40 million. So there are 40 million cars registered in the UK. I think that's a lot. That's a lot. No? Not quite. So we've got 67 million people, 40 million cars. Okay. The reality is not everyone has access to a car. That's an interesting one as well. Okay, let's jump to something else. So, still on the trivial questions here. What do you think is the most popular car colour? And don't be influenced by the picture. Okay. So, what about the most popular car colour? And this is again in the UK. Ooh, okay. We've got an early guess of red. Black. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Black. Oh, okay. You guys are pretty close here. I'm going to show you the stats. So, in the UK, about a quarter of all cars, so it's about 1 in 4 cars, are black. Closely followed by silver, and then blue, and then grey, and then white. So in terms of a colour palette, it's not that extreme, is it? Actually, yeah, very boring. That's a good one. The reality is the colour of cars has become more and more similar. I'm not sure exactly why. I guess it's something to do with the cost of painting them and kind of having that spectrum of colours. But yeah, Interesting question. Okay, so let's jump back then to Daisy's lovely Ford Fiesta. Now, in a car, when you have a car, you drive it and you have to fill it up with some sort of fuel. What do we think do we put into a car? Any ideas? What kind of things? If we're thinking about fuels, what kind of fuels are there? What would you put into a car? So normally a little flap here at the back of a car, and you put something into it. Any ideas what you put into it? Yeah, okay, good answers here. We've got diesel, and maybe the other one. Yeah, so we class these fuels into two groups, petrol and diesel, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that diesel, if you're an older driver, you might choose to drive a diesel, and that might have been because there was sort of some kind of advice in the past to say that they, it was sort of cheaper to run, and you did further on, kind of further on the same amount of petrol. Yeah, okay, we've got some interesting ideas here as well. There are other types of fuels as well. We've got something called liquid petroleum gas, LPG. And is anyone going to give me the other one? Oh yeah, it's already there. Okay, we've got electricity. Yeah, so you might have a more modern car. Interesting question around electricity. How many cars in the UK do you think run on electricity? How many electric cars in the UK do you think there are? What percentage? Let's go with percentage. What percentage of cars in the UK are electric? 20 million. That would be half. So we've got a guess of 50. We've got a guess of 1 million. Let's go with. I'm going to give you the answer. It is less than 0.1%. 0.1% of cars in the UK. And that's interesting. Media, there's lots of kind of media stories about electric cars, and yeah, there's increases in sales, but they are still only make up about 0.1% of cars on the road. Okay, so let's go back. We've got diesel and we've got petrol. These are the main fuels, and you might often think of them as like fossil fuels because they come from fossil fuels. They're sort of derived from oil, yeah. Yeah, hybrid's an interesting one as well. No, 0.1% is just electric. We had a question there from Isabel. Does that include hybrids? No, 0.1% is only pure electric cars. Okay, let's then think about. We're going to go with a bit of yellow. Your car, or a car, or Daisy's car, her Ford Fiesta, has an exhaust, and out of that exhaust comes something. Give me some names of what comes out of the exhaust of a car. What comes out of the exhaust? Often stuff you can't see. Yes. Oh, interesting. Okay, we've got some great ideas already. Yes, so what we've got lots of people suggesting are gases that come out. So we've got one called carbon dioxide. What actually comes out of a car is carbon monoxide, and when it's released, it kind of instantly reacts with the air and creates carbon dioxide. We've also got something called sulfur dioxide, and then we've also got something called nitrogen dioxide, NO2. As well as gases, any ideas what else comes out? This might be the bit that you're more likely to see. Comes out of a car. Other than gas, you might be thinking of words like smog or smoke or bits of dust, or we call them particulate matter, PM. And actually we can group those into two things. PM10, which means they're sort of, it's a measurement, and 2.5, which is slightly smaller. So it's PM10 and 2.5. Yeah, particulates. This is all great stuff. So what we've got is gas and particulates coming out. We are going to focus on two in particular when we move forward. We're going to focus on nitrogen dioxide and this particulate matter. Yeah? Now, are any of you thinking, well, okay, we've got this Ford Fiesta and we've already started talking about different types of cars. Do you think, in terms of making you sick, does it make a difference what kind of car you drive? Do you think some cars... What if Daisy had chose to spend, I don't know, something like £100,000 on this, on a Range Rover. Do you think that's better or worse for us? Ooh, something bigger the smellier. Interesting. Yeah. Some people saying it's maybe the same. The reality is that something like, we call this sort of vehicle an SUV. Yeah, sports utility vehicle, maybe. An SUV. Now, the reality is SUVs have about 25, this is on average, percent more emissions. So they emit more than the average car. And that's partly to do with because they are heavier, so they weigh more. They're often less aerodynamic, and they have larger engines on average as well. Okay, so SUVs, they might make us more sick. Any ideas? What if, and maybe this has already come up, what if Daisy had chose to replace, or not bought a Ford Fiesta and instead bought a Tesla, bought an electric car? Do you think electric cars are going to make us less sick? What do we reckon? So, electric car, it doesn't have an exhaust necessarily. Maybe only slightly better. Yeah, what's interesting is, so an electric car still has wheels, and those wheels are still made of the same material as the other wheels. And what we get is actually there is plastic pollution that comes off in terms of the wear of the tyres. We've got the wear of the brakes as well, so there's particulate matter still coming off this vehicle. And also, it depends where the electricity is coming from. So is the electricity coming from a power station that still burns fossil fuels? Because if you're powering an electric car with fossil fuels, all you're doing is, instead of the emissions coming out of the exhaust, it's coming out of an exhaust or a big pipe somewhere else. So you're kind of displacing the emissions. So yeah, interesting to think about, does it depend on the car? Okay, let's start thinking about how these sorts of emissions affect us, so how this pollution affects us. Yeah, it's right, we got Henry, in terms of long term, electric vehicles is definitely better, so it's a good step change, but maybe it's something we'll come to again later on. Okay, so this is Daisy's friend. He's managed to walk through a particularly interesting machine which has shown us his insides. Now, in terms of breathing these things in, there's a really interesting story. I'm going to jump and let's just have a chat. Now, when we're kind of stood outside, you're breathing in air, and that air goes in through your lungs. It also might come in through your mouth or nose, and then your lungs kind of process it almost. What they do is they take out the oxygen, and then they put that oxygen into your blood. So your lungs kind of do that process of taking oxygen out of the air. So anything that's in the air might well get inside. What's really interesting is if you have been to a big city, you might have experienced at the end of the day that you've got kind of black bogies. Yeah, if you pick your nose, you've got black bogies. Now, that's kind of good in one sense, because actually that's your nose filtering out some of the really big particulate matter, so the big bits of dust and dirt. So that's good. The stuff that we're really kind of worried about is the stuff which is so small that it passes through our nose, and then goes actually through the lining of our lungs, so the particulate matter that's really small. So let's jump back to our friend. Now, what we can think about is he has two lungs, here and here. So those lungs are kind of processing the air and taking oxygen out of the air. Now, any ideas how you think this kind of pollution might affect our bodies? Throw in some stuff in the chat, yeah? Ideas of how. So we've already got it's kind of going in to our lungs. Any ideas what happens? What happens next? I'm just going to give him a bit of a new hairstyle. Yeah, interesting stuff already. Okay, so yeah, basically, because it can affect the function of your lungs, it might make you cough more. If you've got asthma, it can make your asthma worse. Yeah, the particulates can actually reduce the effectiveness of your lungs, so they kind of clog up your lungs and reduce their ability to take in oxygen. And obviously then, if we're reducing the amount of oxygen that's going into our circulation, into our circulatory system, it means that the effectiveness of each and every one of our muscles is sort of affected. And actually, what's quite scary is your brain is a muscle. And so it might well affect, and this is proven with research, that the function of your brain can be impaired. And so things like, there's research suggesting that school children who are in areas with more air pollution actually have less, kind of a lower cognitive ability, that they perform in academic tests less well. Yeah, so basically the reality is air pollution can affect every single aspect of our body, and that's even down to maybe your skin. So you might even get a rash on your skin, and that's partly to do with, or it could be because of air pollution. Okay, I'm going to throw out another big question. How many people do you think die early? And the word we use is prematurely. So they die early because of bad air. We've got Groundhog Girl asking, is the brain a muscle? I guess maybe I'm being a bit loose with my language. It's definitely, there's, in the sense that it's like tissue, and we've got blood flowing around and there's cells. That's what I'm trying to get at. So not necessarily a muscle in the sense that it's the same thing as an arm. How many people though globally? So we've got a population in the world of over 7 billion. So more than 7 billion people. Yeah, I think organ is the word I was looking for. That was good. Organ. Okay. How many people do you think are affected by poor air quality? How many people die prematurely? So we've got a guess of 2 million. How many millions? Is it in the millions? Is it in the thousands? How many people die prematurely? Okay, some good guesses. I'm going to give it out to you. So it is estimated that about 7 million people worldwide are affected by poor air. And a lot of this is, if you're exposed to poor air over the long term, what it can do is it can increase your risk of having a stroke, of getting cancer. It can increase the prevalence of things like Alzheimer's. And actually, now this is the bit that might be a bit more hard hitting, it's only in the last month, the first person, this was a girl in London, there was a court case which actually ruled that she is the first person in the UK to have air pollution as the cause of her death. So on her death certificate it says she died because of poor air, and it was that caused very severe kind of response in terms of asthma. Yeah, now it's kind of quite a shocking thing in that sense, and maybe because we can't see this air pollution, we don't kind of make that connection. What's interesting, I'll just show you one more image here. This shows you globally where those 7 million are, and the reality is that actually the majority of the 7 million are in Southeast Asia. So partly that's because there's such a large population density. So we've got countries like China and India who've got billions of people in each of those. But it might also be that those parts of the world, there's maybe less regulation, there's more industrial practices, so that's an interesting one. But what we do know is that in the UK, the main cause of air pollution, or the main cause, is transport and driving. Okay, let's jump on. I wanted to throw this one in here. Now, put your hand up or say yes if you're affected by motion sickness. Do you get car sick? Are you one of the people in the UK affected by car sickness? There's a few yeses. Oh, okay, no, we've got a few no's. Now, any guesses? What percentage of people, so this is just globally, what percentage of people do you think are affected by motion sickness? What percentage? Give me some guesses. Yeah, someone's throwing in seasickness. That's definitely a thing. Okay, we've got 10%. 10%, 50%. Oh, 50%. That's quite high. Okay, the reality is that studies suggest about 25 Yeah, I think that's still pretty high. 25% of people are affected by motion sickness. I just wanted to throw in here why motion sickness occurs. So I've got this ear, so hopefully this is a bit of a clue. Now, it's our kind of motion is sensed partly in the ear. And what it is that the ear and the eyes send messages to the brain. And normally when we're kind of walking on land, those messages correspond. But what happens is there is this particular nerve ending here. So there's this nerve ending here which kind of touches these circular canals. And it's when there is a disconnect in terms of between our eyes and what our ears are telling our brain. When that disconnect happens, that's the cause of motion sickness. So it's that difference between the ears and the eyes and the disconnect. Okay, so motion sickness, 25% of people. Okay, we're back to Daisy's car. Now, Daisy has got stuck in a traffic jam. She got stuck in a traffic jam actually with someone with the identical car. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. So, car designers, yeah, we've been refining the design of cars, but cars still have an exhaust at the rear, yeah, and we said, yeah, we've got all of these sorts of gases coming out and all of these particulate matter. Now, where do you think the air intake for a car is? So in terms of the air that's inside the car, where have people designed that to be? Any guesses? Where's the intake? Some more gases coming out the back of other car. Yes, okay, so you can see some of these actually. So these are the air intake, some of it for the engine, but also this is the air intake for the inside of the car. And so for some reason, yeah, car designers have designed the air intakes to be at the front at the same height as the exhaust of the other car. So as soon as you're in traffic, and actually we have a word for if you're in a stationary car and the engine is running, that's called idling. So if you're idling and you've got a car in front, what's happening is the air is coming inside the car and then circulating inside. And actually, because of the way that cars are designed, partly to keep the air warm or the air cold, the air is circulated, and that increases the concentration of pollution inside a car. Yeah, it definitely comes into the car. And what happens then when you're sitting in traffic is the air is becoming, and it can be, up to about 10 times more polluted inside the car than if you are stood outside. Yeah? So if you're a person stood on the side of the road, you're actually probably experiencing much lower concentrations of pollution than inside a car. Now, you're right, so there's been a few suggestions that actually there are filters to filter some of this out, but actually those filters mainly only filter out the particulate matter, and very few of the filters filter out the nitrogen dioxide and these other gases. So there's an interesting kind of, yeah, there's the potential for new technology, but also why on earth have cars been designed like this? Because it's invisible, people just aren't aware of it. So yeah, 10 times, can be up to 10 times more. That's something interesting to think of next time you're in a traffic jam. One of the best tips is to open a window. Yeah. So if you're sat in a car, kind of almost in traffic, either turn off the engine if you're sitting for anything more than like 30 seconds, but also maybe open the window, and that helps circulate and change the air. Okay, let's jump to something else. Here is a map of the UK. This is a map of all of the roads in the UK. So we can see in terms of density, there are more around London and some big cities, higher density of roads. Now, my question to you is, how long do you think the average car journey is in the UK? How many miles? So how many miles is the average car journey? Interesting reference point might be Boris Johnson went for a 7-mile bike ride that caused a little bit of kind of people there were a few questions raised about his 7 mile bike ride. Okay, we've got half a mile. That's quite low. A few 5 miles. So the reality is the average car journey in the UK 8.4. You guys were close. You were close. So that's still a pretty low number. And actually, in terms of the way the averages work, the majority, or 55% of journeys, were actually less than 5 miles. So the average 8.4, but actually the majority were less than 5. Now, in terms of if you were on a bicycle or on foot, a 5 mile journey, what's that going to take you? Maybe 20 minutes, half an hour? So there's questions about the way that we travel, and maybe more people should think about maybe walking or cycling rather than driving. Exactly. There's some good suggestions there, especially from Isabel. Okay, let's think globally then. We're going to jump back. This is a map of death, or the death rate from road accidents. So, looking at this, any ideas which country has the highest death rate from road accidents? So where are people dying most from road accidents? Any ideas? Which countries? You should be able to see that. You might see that the darkest colours on this map, that's where the highest are, and then the lightest colour are the least deaths. So we've got places, maybe some places down here. Let me change colour actually, make it stand out a bit more. We've got places down here, places down here. Yeah, sorry, the key is that the darker the colour, the higher the concentration. So yeah, we've got Somalia as a guess, that's a good one. So places maybe in sub-Saharan Africa, also in the Middle East is an interesting one. So the highest is actually this country, so the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has one of the highest death rates. Now, part of the reason for that is that there's very few regulations or rules. There's not much of a driving test. You can drive with a mobile phone. Speed limits, it depends where you are, but there are not many. It makes life interesting. Yeah, driving in the Middle East, there's some mentions there from people's experiences. What about, though, then, where do you think has the lowest? So which country in the world might have the lowest? Let's have some guesses. Where's going to have the safest roads? We've got some places, maybe Northern Europe, Germany, yeah. Greenland, yeah, Greenland. Population density there, really low. Finland, so we're thinking Scandinavia, yeah. Scandinavia, famous also for like Volvos and kind of really super safe cars. Well, the reality is though that one of the places with the lowest is this country, and this is the Maldives. Now, why? Well, the Maldives is a string of islands down here in South India, or south of India, in the Indian Ocean, and on those islands there are not many roads. There are a few, and actually there are, in terms of on the capital city, yeah, there are cars, but there aren't big roads, there aren't massive motorways, people can't get up to speed, so actually it has a pretty low fatality rate, or there's not many deaths. Okay, so interesting in exploring kind of where in the world has the highest and lowest death rates. But we can also think about death in a different way. We can measure it using something called micromorts. Now, has anyone heard of micromorts? Anyone heard? Yeah, okay. Isabel's raising, just what before we get onto micromorts, let's just think about where most accidents happen. Yeah, it's interesting to explore kind of where accidents happen in the sense of like vulnerable road users, and often accidents involve pedestrians and cyclists. So yeah, kind of you can explore in terms of density of accidents. Okay, well, micromorts, let's think about micromorts. Another way of measuring the likelihood or risk of death. And what this does is it measures a 1 in a million probability. So it's the likelihood that you will die as a 1 in a million. Yeah, small deaths. It's a measure of how risky things are, and it's an interesting way to then kind of measure and assess or compare the riskiness of different behaviours. Now, before I go any further, I want to say the reality is that actually any choice we make has an effect on the likelihood of our death. Yeah, even like having a bacon sandwich reduces or increases the probability of death. Even getting out of bed. So every morning, every time you get out of bed in the morning, yeah, every time you get out of bed in the morning, the likelihood of your death increases by 2.4 micromorts every morning. So even just the like getting out of bed is a kind of slightly risky behaviour. But what we can do is use that to kind of look at the comparison of different travel habits. So you can compare actually how far would you have to go to have the same probability of death. And what the reality shows is maybe it goes against people's kind of assumptions. I think increasingly, and particularly the way that the media presents this, people think about like air travel as being really dangerous and risky because we've had some quite high-profile accidents or crashes, and even recently, I think in the last week or two, there's been a case of this. But the reality is that air travel is one of the safest ways to travel in terms of distance. So in terms of distance, you can cover a long or a far distance with a very low likelihood of death. The same with travelling by water. And the reality is that one of the most risky behaviours or travel is actually a motorcycle, yeah, as well as pedestrians, and that's to do with your vulnerability. And actually, the reality is, you'd have to get a 1 in 2 chance of being killed in a motorcycle accidents. You'd still only have to travel 9 million kilometers by motorcycle. So it kind of shows actually that most of these behaviours are actually not super duper risky, but in terms of relativeness. We've got puddle of ape. You are right. Fewer deaths per kilometre. That's what this is comparing. Okay, so what we're going to just move on to then is, we've looked at things like the air pollution. We've looked at motion sickness in terms of making us like sick. There's a couple of other things that affect kind of in terms of driving and making us sick. The next one. So we're going back to Daisy. So Daisy, we said she was a kind of your average person. What's happened to her is she's actually become more and more sedentary. Now, sedentary means kind of less physical activity. So people are now living more lives where basically we do less and less exercise, yeah, and that's kind of across the world. That's what's happening as people become slightly kind of wealthier, and we kind of change our lifestyles. We do less physical activity. Now, I want to ask you a question around this. Again, it's a big global one. How many people do you think die worldwide because of physical inactivity, just because they don't move enough? Yeah. So how many people do you think die prematurely because they just don't move enough? So we've got, is it Groundhog Girl? She's suggesting she's on a treadmill, so I'm just gonna, here we are, we're gonna put Daisy on a treadmill. Daisy's on the treadmill. Okay, we've got some good guesses. We've got a really wildly varying guesses. We've got 10 million, 50 million, 20 million. Okay, the reality is that there are around 5 million people who are dying prematurely or dying because of physical inactivity. And we often associate kind of physical activity with fast food and all sorts of kind of unhealthy lifestyle habits in that sense. But it's also to do with the car. So the car has meant that we walk and cycle less. Yeah, we are far more likely now to just get into the car and drive places, and that's causing people to die. Yeah. Yeah, so some good guesses here. Yeah, we were talking about worldwide. We were saying that 5 million people worldwide. So this is deaths worldwide. Do people think that's kind of quite low? This is solely because they just haven't done enough physical activity, and that can lead to kind of other health implications. Okay, I'm going to move on to some of the last ones then. I wanted to touch on this. So, in terms of making us sick, you might think that actually there's something, the system is against us. Yeah, you might think that actually. So we've got like the car industry, big companies, yeah, who actually the reality is there's very few companies who own the majority of car companies. So if you look into this, there are lots of like subsidiary companies that own other ones, and increasingly they're kind of buying each other up. So one thing is we've got the car industry itself that is creating advertising and campaigns that kind of entice us to buy cars. We have roads and parking. That is part of a system that is sort of locking us into cars. We've then got increasingly land that is used for cars. We give over a large proportion of our space to cars. Any ideas how long of a car's lifestyle, of a car's life, how much time, as a percentage, what percentage of a car's time is spent stationary, so still? So we have a car. How much, what percentage is spent just still, not being used? What percentage of a car's time is spent not being used? Woo! Groundhog Girl, you got it. Okay, it is about 95%. Some people say even more. I've seen some studies that are suggesting like 98%. So they're just spent parked up, taking up space, not being used, which is kind of quite a crazy, wild number. Okay. So what then happens though is that has an impact on public transport. So particularly in the UK, things like buses and trains, pretty expensive. And then we have programs like Top Gear and all these other sort of programs that create a car culture where it's locked into people's identity, and people feel an affinity that the car is kind of part of them. And all of these things collectively are kind of working against us in terms of moving away from cars and making us maybe less sick. I'm going to throw in one last one as well then. Is this quite a complex diagram, but I'm going to talk you through it. The planning system in general also is kind of an interesting one. What it shows is that the way that we design where we live actually makes it more likely that we are going to drive, simply because to get from one place or from A to B, you might think it's easiest to just do it by car. And there are some really obvious things that we can do. We can provide better walking and cycling routes. We can make spaces or places that we kind of want to spend more time in. We can change the layout of streets, and we can change the hierarchy in the sense that rather than giving priority to cars, we can give the priority to people who are walking, and we can just make it feel more comfortable. Yeah, there are definitely places in the world. It's interesting. People are throwing in where they're from. We've got some people from Texas, from Canada. You know, the layout of roads around the world differs in different cities. There are some cities that do this really well. We can think about like Amsterdam as being the obvious one. And places like London are definitely getting better. Okay, I want us to finish here, and kind of we've jumped around loads of different. We've jumped around loads of different ways that driving is making us sick. And I wanted to say thank you for listening. And let's quickly, does anyone have any questions? Let's explore some questions before we finish. We've got some people asking about, have they been to Amsterdam? It's definitely much easier and safer to cycle a bike. There's also this thing when you go to Amsterdam that cyclists look like any old person. You don't have to put on special clothing. People don't wear helmets, and it's just kind of part of society. Cool. Okay, well, if no one else has any other questions, let's finish. Thank you so much for listening. Please do review us on Trustpilot, and at the bottom of the website on Aim High, there's a link. It makes a really big difference. Do follow all of our socials and join the Aim High community mailing list. Remember that in the coming weeks, we've got some adventures with Education Scotland. We've also got a few other learning adventures going on, so please make sure that you catch the others. And thank you so much for coming along and all of your engagement. Cheers!